Miami Dolphins second-round draft choice Jonah Savaiinaea is one of 30 unsigned second-round draft choices. How urgent should the Dolphins feel to get this contract done ASAP? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, we are looking at this continuing standoff between the league's second-round draft choices made after pick number 34, shout out to the Houston Texans, and NFL teams across the league, where you have 30 unsigned second-round draft choices, which is pretty unheard of after the collective bargaining agreement that was done 2 times ago, beginning of like 2010. They put the rookie wage scale in place because guys are coming in, get drafted first overall, and they're becoming highest paid players in the league right off the jump, right? And it kind of created this disparity for veteran players where they don't like it because they have sweat equity and they prove they're good and they're getting outpaid by rookies, and the teams don't like it because there's more risk involved. So everybody kind of agreed, hey, let's put a pool of salary together as like a share of revenue, and then it's divided up equally, or not equally, in descending order for how high you're drafted. You get a bigger slice of the pie, and it's pre-established. And that solved a lot of problems up until the Houston Texans traded out of the first round of this year's NFL draft back to number 34, and then gave Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver out of Iowa State, a fully guaranteed contract. Had never been done before. And then Cleveland, sitting at pick 33 with Carson Schwessinger, said, well, shoot, 32 and 31 through 1 all got fully guaranteed, and 34 just got a fully guaranteed contract. I guess we really don't have much ground to fight here. So they gave Carson Schwessinger a fully guaranteed contract. Number 35 was Nick Emanwari. Jonah Savaiinaea was picked at 37. 35 through 64 remain unsigned. And we officially have our first holdout, Trey Harris, wide receiver of the Chargers. They had their rookies report to camp over the weekend, and Trey Harris holding out. And you have this against the backdrop of the collusion investigation that was done against NFL owners for fully guaranteed contracts and the Lamar Jackson saga from a few years ago. So you have a couple different layers here of chess, not checkers. Feels like it's being played with like the players and the Players Association and the agents versus the teams. And it's in Game of Thrones style. Chaos is a ladder, right? But the saying goes, deadlines spur action. I wrote this for A to Z story. I wrote it from both sides of the coin. Teams that can afford to wait this out versus teams that should feel more urgent than everybody else to get their contracts done. And I wanted to look at where the Dolphins fell on that spectrum. And for me personally, I think the Dolphins are one of the teams across the NFL that should feel the highest sense of urgency to get their contract with Jonah Savaiinaea done relative to picks at 50 with the Seahawks. With one of their second round draft choices, they drafted Elijah Royal. Well, they have Noah Fant at tight end, and they drafted AJ Barner last year's second round player. You want to have Arroyo ready to roll, but it's not like Jonah Savaiinaea, who's a part of your total overhaul of the position, right? And you reflect on how the Dolphins offense operated last year and when it became very apparent that these are our limitations and this is what we have to try to do to circumvent our limitations, and how limited the offense felt like it was because you couldn't dictate terms and get teams out of playing you a certain kind of way. So lo and behold, they go out this offseason and they sign James Daniels and they trade up and they draft Jonah Savaiinaea because they have a lot of conviction in who he is as a player and what they think he can be. And we did the offensive line investment series last week. They have pretty good, this duo of McDaniel and Greer, when they choose to kind of say it with their chest and like put their stamp on a guy, they've got a decent track record. They just didn't invest enough versus letting the temptation of young players that are cost controlled. They got complacent with that. That plus the ideology of offensive line versus skill players that came over from the Shanahan tree, right? Not to redo that whole podcast all over again. But I want to go through the second round. And I want to spotlight why, relative to what other teams are dealing with, why I think the Dolphins should have this little extra itch to scratch to get this done. And then we're going to look at the financials, like literally what is being squabbled over, right, between the two parties. But you also don't want to be the team that steps out of line here, because the Texans have already done this. They've made life harder for everybody else, including themselves, because they drafted Ariante Ursary with a draft choice they picked at 48, I believe, which was Miami's original pick. So the irony here is Houston kind of cut their own nose off to spite your face, because now everybody is kind of gridlocked. Nobody else wants to sign. Houston made one concession. Cleveland was sandwiched in between the two, so they signed, and everybody else is kind of in a staring contest right now. So we're going to look at some of the rest of the second round, why I think Miami's situation should be amplified and more intense, and what what is on the line here that you're fighting about. We're going to get into all that next here on Locked On Dolphins, so make sure you guys stick with us. Look, we've all been there. You're logging on early, waiting for forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be all about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping, and that's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop the closer that you get to showtime, so you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. So if you're tired of endless scrolling to try to find the best deal, Gametime's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you, and they have panoramic views. They have all-in pricing. There's no guesswork with fees, and all of a sudden your shopping cart's twice what you thought it was going to be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets with the lowest prices, guaranteed. So let's take a quick jaunt, if you will, through most of the second round, because there's some names that I want to highlight on either side of the coin here. Nick Eamon-Warry picked at 35. Seattle traded up for Nick Eamon-Warry. It's represented by David Mulligetta from Athletes First, who is one of the top agents in the game. They've played the hardball battles. Feel pretty good that they're probably going to be dug in unless Seattle caves. And Seattle could very easily just cave and say, hey, listen, 34 got it. We're 35. We'll let somebody else be the team that has the conviction. We want to get our guy in here. So we're going to sign him because it was one pick after, and then incrementally it shuffles down to the next team, who's the Cleveland Browns. And Quinshon Judkins, the running back from Ohio State, was their pick at 36. Judkins was arrested over the weekend with some really nasty assault and domestic violence stuff. The police report just came out today. So I can't imagine that the Browns are necessarily chomping at the bit to, in the backdrop of that due process that now has to play out as far as the allegations and the police report and Judkins and the legal workings that have to proceed to determine his guilt or innocence, whatever it may be. Can't imagine the Browns are itching to say, hey, for the first time ever, we're going to give the 36th pick in the draft a fully guaranteed contract. Jonah Savaiinaea happened at 37. Travion Henderson to the Patriots, Luther Burden to the Bears, Tyler Shuck to the Saints is an interesting one. Texans Cap on Twitter. He and I had an exchange over the weekend, and he mentioned, Shuck being, hey, that might be one everybody's kind of watching because it's a quarterback, right? And the positional value that comes with that, you probably have as good of a chance to strong arm everybody else as anybody else would in this queue. He's the only second-round quarterback. But I actually think the Saints are pretty well aligned to wait this out. They're not expected to be very good. They have a coach in the first year of regime in Kellen Moore. This is second-round draft choice. And if the Saints end up, Tyler Shuck's one of the oldest players drafted in the draft. If he ends up being not good, right, then the Saints are going to be bad. They also have a draft pick last year at quarterback in Spencer Rattler, who played less than 400 snaps. They might want to see more of. So you could, you don't feel like Tyler Shuck has to be ready for the start of the season. And then if the Saints end up being bad, they might pick really early next year in a better quarterback class and draft somebody else. You're not going to want to have 3 years of guarantees behind that. I think they've got a pretty good shot to wait. TJ Sanders to the Bills, Mason Taylor to the Jets. Feels wrong to say it. Jason Taylor's kid to the Jets. Alfred Collins to the 49ers at 43. Donovan Izaraku to the Cowboys at 44. JT Mualu to the Colts at 45. Just a few more I'm going to do. Terrence Ferguson to the Rams at 46. Will Johnson to the Cardinals at 47. And then Ariante Ursary to the Texans with pick 48, which is where Miami was originally scheduled to pick. I look at this group. Henderson's got Ramondre Stevenson in the backfield. Chicago's got a top 10 pick at wide receiver from last year's class in Roma Dunze. Shuck, we just kind of went through. Sanders not projected to start in Buffalo. For the Jets with Mason Taylor, could be a really critical receiving target for them. But at the same time, that's going to be a run-first offense. I think Alfred Collins is in a unique situation with San Francisco like the Dolphins. Because if the Dolphins don't sign Jonah Savaiinaea and this holdout extends into camp, now you're losing reps to get a guy ready to go. He needs to start the season. He needs to be a starter. Because your alternative is James Daniels, who I think can be very good, even if he's not fully 100% recovered from the Achilles, as long as he's medically cleared. Larry Borum, if he's not going to be your swing tackle, or maybe he's your swing tackle that you end up kicking inside because you're holding out for Jonah with a fully guaranteed contract and you have convictions about that. Or it's Liam Eichenberg. Those are your options. Jonah Savaiinaea needs to start the season for the Dolphins and be healthy and be prepped. And being prepped means taking all the reps in training camp as a rookie to get ready to play football. Period. Now, I think Alfred Collins, the 49ers, they've remade their entire defensive front. They gave up 24 rushing touchdowns last year, which is more than they had given up in the previous 2 seasons combined. They went from second in yards per rush in 2 years later, last year, to being 17th. It was almost 4.5 yards a carry for the 49ers. Collins is like the guy. That's the other team in the top 50 that I think should feel the heat to get it done. You get outside the top 50, you go down to Tate Ratledge with Detroit at 57, and Frank Ragnow retired. Ratledge penciled in to take his spot. I think they're the team that probably feels the most pressure to get their guy signed. He's doing a position transition to a position he never played in college, to then play center and take over for Frank Ragnow, where at center, you also have to handle all the communication. That's a lot of weight for a guy that, like, you can hold out here, wait for a couple $1 million of fully guaranteed for 3 and 4 years from now. It's a hard sell to wait. But there's teams like Arroyo, who we mentioned. Terrence Ferguson, they've got a number of tight ends on the roster there with the Rams. Mason Taylor, we're not sure how pass heavy they're going to be. Alfred Collins, I think, is in the same boat as Jonah Savaiinaea, where you need to get that locked in because of the lack of other options to serve that role as potentially being an upgrade. And even if you're not the best version of yourself, still better than what else is out there. Because for the 49ers, at defensive tackle, it's like names like Kevin Givens and CJ West. None of those guys play the run like Alfred Collins. That's like all those names that we mentioned for the Dolphins and their offensive line. None of those names really give you an appeal quite like Jonah Savaiinaea would. Now, I want to go to last year's draft with the 2024 NFL draft and the player that was picked in the same spot that Jonah was drafted to talk about what was guaranteed off of that contract versus what was not guaranteed off of that contract. Patriots picked in that spot last year, and they signed Jauan Polk, wide receiver from University of Washington, to a 4-year contract worth $9.6 million that had a $3.8 million signing bonus. Okay, so he got half of the value of his contract he got in year one. His guaranteed at signing was the signing bonus of $3.87 million, his 2024 salary, which was a minimum salary, $795,000. In total, ended up being $4.6 million in cash. All of his 2025 salary was also guaranteed, which was $1.235 million. All of his 2026 salary was fully guaranteed, which was $1.6 million. And he had $636,000 of his 2027 salary that was also guaranteed. You're talking out of a total contract value of $9.69 million. Nice. $8.21 million of it was fully guaranteed. You're talking less than $1.5 million that's due 4 years from now. I will tell you this. From the Dolphins' perspective, I'm glad that we have our convictions and we're not going to let these players come in and facilitate getting new deals because we need you and we want you to be happy to be here, right? It was part of the Jonnu Smith wanted to be a member of the Dolphins. I'm sad Jonnu Smith is no longer a member of the Dolphins. But I am not sad that the Dolphins, because, and we're going to talk about another player going back to San Francisco, they're in the same boat and they had the same approach. Squeaky wheels get grease, and grease in this case being a new contract. The 49ers have another squeaky wheel. And they've had several squeaky wheels, and they gave grease to all the squeaky wheels, just like the Dolphins did. And they regress, they go through youth movement, and now they have a new squeaky wheel. Well, that happened with the Dolphins too, and all the same things happened, and they traded Jonnu Smith. And I don't say that like with any disrespect to Jonnu Smith, because like I wanted him to be here. And he has a right to want to maximize his earnings potential. I get that. It's a career year for him. I have no ill will towards Jonnu Smith, but for the Dolphins' perspective, like you had to start doing business a little differently. And that's why I don't buy like, oh, the Dolphins traded Jalen Ramsey for no reason. But if it's rookie contract, it was like $1.4 million 4 years from now. That's what you're potentially going to hold a guy out of getting reps at the beginning of the season for. Picked at 37. The guy at 34 got a fully guaranteed contract. I'd do it. I'd sign it. I would give the fully guaranteed contract if I were the Dolphins. And, you know, I would not say the same thing if I were the Saints at 40 or if I were the Seahawks with Elijah Arroyo. Like, I think circumstantially, some teams have different appetites to wait this out and say, look, we've never done this before. We're not going to start now. But for the Dolphins, especially for there is pressure to win this year. You made this commitment. You already put your chest out there because you gave up a 3rd-round pick to go up and get this guy. You got that much conviction in him. What difference does $1.4 million in 2028 make? For me, it makes none. It makes none. But we're going to finish today talking about Jauan Jennings with the San Francisco 49ers. Wide receiver, you always got to ask. Does it make sense? Should you call? We're going to talk a little bit about Jauan Jennings, his situation, and the Dolphins next here. Locked on Dolphins. Stick with us. There would be a time and a place and an era where I would think that the Dolphins entertaining calling the 49ers for Jauan Jennings would make a lot of sense. I don't know that time is the here and now in the present iteration of the multiverse that we live in, though. It's 2025. Jennings is 28 years old. He's coming off of a career year. He set career highs in targets, receptions, yards, receiving touchdowns, yards per target, just short of 1,000 yards last year. 49ers had a bunch of injuries with Brandon Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey. Deebo Samuel was a regressing player. They've since traded him. Ricky Pearsall had a really scary start to the season where he got shot and then missed some time, kind of put him behind the 8 ball for his season as a rookie player for San Francisco at wide receiver. So the beneficiary of a lot of that, Jauan Jennings, he's very good beating man-to-man coverage. He runs good routes. He's a big body guy at 6'3", big physical player. He's scheduled to make $7.5 million this year on what is a contract year. So you, as a team that would be acquiring Jauan Jennings, would be presumably trading to acquire a player who's never played here and presumably giving him a contract because he says, I either want a new contract in San Francisco or I want to be traded to somewhere that's going to pay me and have opportunities, right? And it's kind of the same thing as Johnny Smith, right? Like, it's a career year. You're a fifth-year wide receiver. You're 28. You came into the league a little bit older. It's kind of a defined window. And I'm also looking at across the league, and guys like Josh Palmer and Diami Brown, these guys got $10 million a piece in free agency a year. Jauan Jennings has more receiving yards in 2024 than Diami Brown has in 4 years of playing in the NFL by 200 yards. Right? So he's like, dude, that guy hit for agency, got 10 million per. Like, I want to play for 7.5. I don't blame him. I don't blame him. But the hard part for the Dolphins is kind of how you've gone about conducting business. You have gone out and got players with second contracts and given new contracts out and not gone after cost control players. And through that regard, I think it makes it tough. Now, if you were living in a world where if San Francisco, and maybe they don't have this cash pinch now, but they let a lot of guys go in free agency. They let a lot of really talented football players leave because they wanted to get younger, and they're paying Brock Purdy now. And Brock was on the 7th-round contract, getting paid peanuts, pennies on the dollar. There's some economic changes with San Francisco, right? If you told me you could get big-brained and it could be like Tyreek Hill as a part of a package going to San Francisco with Jauan Jennings as part of a package that's coming back to Miami, a la what you did with Jalen Ramsey and Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think there's pathways where that would be a win for the Dolphins. I don't think that makes sense for San Francisco, but that would be the only way that I think it makes sense for Miami, because then you'd be offloading salary even after you pay Jauan Jennings. You'd be offloading salary. But I would look at Jennings and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Jalen Waddle as a really good complementary. Like, you want to get better at 11 personnel. You want to get better running the football. You want to get more physical on the boundary. You want to have more size. Well, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and Jauan Jennings as two guys, and then Waddle can either be the Z. You can put him in isolation on third downs against when you're anticipating man coverage. You can put him in the slot and give him extra space. And Westbrook-Ikhine is a down the field type of guy, and Jauan Jennings is a guy who can play big physical and route you up and win through contact. So I see a lot of ways in which the idea of it would appeal, I think, to Miami, especially with some of the other moves that they've made to try to diversify what they are offensively. But I just think with how they've conducted their business, what they're trying to do differently with their business, what they're trying to do differently with their salary, the tradability of Tyreek Hill. You're now invested in Tyreek Hill for another year. I don't know that you'll be invested in Tyreek beyond 2025, but it feels like they're invested in him here in the here and now. And you make peace with that and you say, okay, like, we're going to ride it out for another year and then see where Tyreek Hill's at with his age 32 season when he's owed a whole lot of money. So I'm sure people will ask with Jauan Jennings. ESPN's Adam Schefter did report it today that he either wants a new contract or wants to be traded. There's pathways in which it would make sense for the Dolphins, but I think it's the right kind of player at the wrong time. personally, for where the Dolphins are at. Unless there's some dynamics with players that are currently in-house that would then in turn change versus what we think we know it's going to look like for this season. But an interesting storyline amidst a ton of wide receiver movement when you consider Pickens and Metcalf got traded. You go back to last year and it was Hopkins and Amari Cooper and Jonathan Mingo, and there's been a ton of wide receiver trades. I'll be interested to see what San Francisco does because the Dolphins showed you what they were going to do. Are you want a new contract? We're not doing it. He signed a 2-year deal. Jauan Jennings signed a 2-year deal. And now he's outperformed the compensation 1 year into a 2-year deal. And once it readjusted, we'll see what the 49ers do. But the Dolphins showed you what they did when they moved Jonnu Smith. That's going to do it for us here today on the show, Kyle Krabs. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins because it is your team every day. Appreciate you all for coming by. I'll be back again tomorrow. Go Fins.